welcome to the Creative Masterclass. I'm Poi Fan Lee. So let's kick off with our session today. We have some special guests here. On my right, we have...
I'm Daniel Postgate. I'm Oliver's son, and I'm a producer on the new Clangers and writer on the Clangers as well.
This is...
I'm Dan Madicott. I'm the series producer on the Clangers, and I do all the whistling.
Would you, and to my left, this is Rosie Allison.
I'm Rosie Allison. I'm at Heyday Films. I'm a producer, and I'm the executive producer of the 2 Paddington films, and now the forthcoming Paddington preschool series.
Right, over the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to be discussing how the characters, the Clangers and Paddington, have become timeless over the years, and we'd like to know how this has happened, why, and dare I say, will they be future-proof? Let's start by asking you, Dan Postgate. Now tell me about the origins of the Clangers. Now it's July 2019. That's quite significant, isn't it? 50 years ago, something very special happened that was out of this world, which might be quite important relating to the Clangers.
Would that be the lunar landing?
No.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, well, my dad was... it coincided with the lunar landing. That what started the ball rolling, really, was the BBC were going into colour, and they wanted to have something very colourful for the just before the news, the children's slot, and I think Peter and Oliver thought about something modern and something quite zazzy and sort of... I think Peter was quite interested in the fashion of the 60s fashion at the time, and Joan, his wife, hence the sort of the armour sort of shapes and stuff. But they had a character called from Nog in the Nog that was in a book, a Nog in the Nog book, about a moon mouse that landed in the trough, the horse's trough. He was a little bit like he was like an ancient clanger. I suppose in Nog in the Nog times, he wore a duffel coat and had a tail. And so they looked at that and they thought, well, maybe we could see where the moon mouse actually lived and lives now, and what they get up to. So they followed that along. That was the germ of the idea of making the Clangers. The fact that it was at the same time as the lunar landing probably was a little bit of a nervous part of the sort of the whole thing for my dad and Peter. I think my dad was a little bit wary about, obviously things can go wrong when you go to the moon in real life, And so he was just a little bit concerned about how it would go, how that would work out, with a sort of science fiction children's program about the same time going along.
So the Clangers originally came from a sort of a small character from Nog in the Nog.
Yes.
And you got rid of the tail and the duffel coat.
Yes.
And we have a wee Clanger there. Do you want to introduce this Clanger here?
Yes, this is Tiny Clanger, who is the smallest of all the Clangers.
And this is
an original
Clanger.
Yeah.
Now, who knitted this Clanger?
That was Peter Firmin's wife, Joan, who knitted it.
And I read recently someone saying they were knitted with wool and love. And I thought, isn't that it's absolutely wonderful? I know. So why do you think the Clangers were so popular 50 years ago?
Well, on the television side of things, I think the reason it was popular was because it was just before the news. And so it got 6 million viewers quite often, because everybody was just waiting for the real news, I suppose. They probably wanted something light-hearted beforehand. But I don't know, I mean, it's remained popular. I mean, all my dad's programmes, really, with Bagpuss and Noggin and Ivor and so forth, they've all seemed to have remained popular, really, and just that they're good storytelling. I think, really, at the end of the day, I think if you've got good stories, I think that means an awful lot. I think that's very important. I mean, my dad wasn't so worried in a way about how things were presented, because that was Peter's side of things, really. But quite often, when he made the Pogle's Wood, he made it al fresco, he made it outside, with the characters animated, and somebody wrote to him and said, Mr. Postgate, do you understand that the clouds are moving very fast and the shadows are juddering about? And he said, yeah, well, yes, so what? Because he didn't really mind very much.
Because these were all stop-motion animation.
Yeah.
So it took...
I mean,
forever.
so the early times when he was first experimenting, he made the program called The Penguins, which was about penguin-like characters around the farm where Peter lived. He made it all outside, which I don't think they do anymore. It's sort of like, because you can't control the weather and the movements. But that wasn't his sort of concern, really. But I mean, his main thing he was concerned about was having a good story to tell, really.
Right. And Dan, I know you're the whistler.
Mm-hmm.
Right now.
I've got tiny
he's
in my
searching
pocket.
in his pocket. Would you like to?
This is tiny. I got... thank you. That was a nonsense sentence. I'm sure you all recognise that, because we actually do it with the intonation of the English language. But
Oh, right. I was just about to say we don't have the subtitles underneath or anything like that. So what about your contribution at that time?
well, at the very beginning, very little, nothing. In fact, I didn't get to know Oliver until the 1980s, because I used to run the children's channel, and I was trying to get the rights. But the rights had been with the BBC, unbelievably, for 19 years. It had been shown sort of every year, the Clangers, for about 19 years, I think. And eventually it came out of the rights, and so I bought the rights, and I restored Bagpuss and the Clangers at the best you could in those days, which was before digitisation and everything, but we cleaned it and everything. And then I showed them on the children's channel, and from that, Oliver got a new video deal, and then Nickelodeon took them, and it kept on going. It kept on and on going.
Because how many episodes did you make originally? Did your father make?
26.
So not many,
And,
really, in the scheme
the
of
special.
things. Oh, yes. And there was do you want to talk to us about this special, which some of you may not have heard of? But your father, he made quite a radical choice by making a very special episode called Vote for Froglet, which went out on the day of the general election 1974. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. It was, they observed the goings-on Earth, I think. I'm not quite sure how they did it, but anyway. And they decided to have a general election on the Clangers planet. So you could either vote for Froglet or you could vote for the soup dragon, you see. And what happened was there was great animosity grew, unexpectedly. The Clangers divided into different camps, that you could either go for Froglet or you could go for the soup dragon, and then they started arguing, and it was just hell on earth, really.
It's the sort of thing that they could really show today, couldn't they, to represent what's going on in...
Well, I know, it was a bit of I don't think they usually do this sort of thing today, yeah. My dad made it while Peter was on holiday. I don't know if Peter was aware of what was going on, but he quickly animated it.
So did you think, was Oliver and Peter, were they sort of given carte blanche of what to do in those days? Were there many rules and restrictions of
No, I think they were pretty much given a carte blanche. The Bible, we got some photographs from the Bible, we can show in a bit, but was a very short book with some pictures and a bit of writing in it. And they gave them a few £100 and sent them on their way to get on with it, really. Yeah. I mean, I think after, actually, they made Pogle's Wood, or the Pogles, with the Pogle Witch, and that was very scary, and they showed it once, and then they said, no, you can't do that. It was, and they thought maybe we'd better check on what they're doing in future, because, the Pogle Witch was,
a bit too scary.
A bit too scary for
Shall we take a look at some of your work?
Oh, yeah, we can have a look at the tablecloth is the first...
Yeah, we've got a couple of things here, because it's the 50th anniversary of the Clangers and the moon landing in the same year, and Monty Python, by the way, talking of Michael Palin, who does our narration. It was asked, we all suggested that we should do a moon landing episode for this series, But there was also a moon landing episode in the original series. And both feature an astronaut. So we haven't got a lot of time, but we just cut a minute from each. So this is from the digitally restored original series of the Clangers called The Tablecloth. And if I press this, yeah.
Notice it's caught on fire. The planet's caught on fire.
Well, he didn't stay long, did he? Half a dozen more planets to do before tea time, I dare say. But look what he left behind.
So that was a minute of the original one. And this is a minute of the one that hasn't gone out yet. And it's going to go out, I think, on the actual anniversary of the moon landing. Well, we don't usually have the orchestra, but the BBC offered us the BBC Philharmonic for this, episode.
Wow.
So we've got an opening, a John Williams type opening for the episode, but we can't show that yet.
So do tell us what happened between... You said you remastered some and made some into videos, is that correct?
Yeah.
But then the next step was to bring it back onto our screens on CBeebies. How did that happen?
Well, after a lot of talking, I think. I mean, when we had the rights, when my company had the rights, we were asked by the Japanese that they'd like to buy the rights, but they wanted to remake it. And at the time, A, we wouldn't want it remade in Japan, and B, it didn't seem the right time. But I got to know Dan quite well. And we talked a lot for several years about doing a new series. And Peter Thurman, who was unfortunately died last year, but was very keen, I think, to say. And he said that he thought this was the one series that they'd done that could possibly do with a lot more episodes, that there was a lot more stories to be told in this whole setup. And he was instrumental with Dan, obviously, in getting this off the ground. And we produced a Bible, and we took it with some trepidation to the BBC, knowing that how few remakes and new versions of old series had worked, basically. And we assured Kay that it wasn't going to be CGI, so we wouldn't. And we took two knitted clangers, maquettes about that high, to show what it would look like. And they said yes. So then the work started.
Well, we had, through Coolabye, and also with Sprout in America as well. They sort of invested in the series, which had William Shatner doing the voice. So, which was
How did you feel about that?
Well, I was absolutely delighted. William Shatner was like when I was a kid, on Star Trek. My God, he was. Did
he understand the clangers?
Yeah, he liked it, didn't he? Yeah, he said it was an honour to do it, I think. I mean, he might say that, he was very... he's not like Michael Palin exactly. Michael sort of... He did his job and then he left and I didn't meet him, but there was no retakes. With Michael's very happy to go and have a pizza and chat and stuff, you know. So no, it was very exciting. I was very excited. I was delighted that it was.
So how did you go about modernising the Clangers for the new audience?
Well, Peter had obviously done a lot of design work. We've got just one. These are some of the. This is from the original Bible that he did for the BBC in 1969, and Peter was very keen to be involved in the redesign and the work. And the first thing we said to him was, well, how do we know how you get from A to B? Because the original series, as Dan will say, was rather made up, not made up as it went along, but things weren't sort of all laid down on day one. But because we would, although Dan was going to write a huge number of the episodes, because we had to have other writers, we had to know the geography of the planet. So we thought we'd get a little sketch from Peter. And about 2 days later, we got that. Now, if you can see that, you probably can't, it's a little bit pale for when it's projected, but that is a complete layout of the Clangers planet. It's how you get from the living cave to the soup wells, to Mother's Garden, which was a new set, and to every part of the planet, including how do you get up the top. And that became our guide for the series. And he did, I haven't brought them with me, but he did a whole lot of breakout things so that every area had its own individual large picture, and which we gave to our art director. And that was what was behind the whole set design. And he stayed right up until his sad death. I mean, he stayed involved. And in the second series, Major, we know, makes things, but in the first series, we couldn't afford to make Major's workshop because it was a set too far. But in the second series, because the first series had been a success, we decided we could have a new set. So we asked him, what would it look like? And we got all these. Well, we also had a Mother's Garden, which he'd wanted to do in series 1. So he did all these designs for us, as a basis for our work.
So all that care, love and attention from Peter and your input has created this whole new generation of fans of the Clangers. So
Yeah. I think it's great to, you know, with, I mean, we brought in some, a mother that now has a garden. I was thinking perhaps she could start growing some sort of vegetables and things as well for the kids, you know. But at the moment, they're generally flowers. Some of them are friendly, talkative flowers. And
so we'll look out for those. Thank you very much, Dan. And Dan, we're going to move over to... That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Now, over to Rosie. Now, Rosie, you are the executive producer of the Paddington films and the brand new TV preschool series of Paddington. Oh, I've got this little thing for you, apparently. Thank you. Now, would you like to show a little clip of Paddington right now?
Well, we could do the first question.
Yes, I'll tell you. Yes, let me ask you. Personally, Rosie, I watched Paddington when I was young, many, many moons ago. How about you? Did you used to love Paddington?
I fell in love with Paddington as a child, as I'm sure many of you did. I first met him in book form. I loved the books and those wonderful Peggy Fortnum drawings. I think what I first fell in love with was just the oddness of this talking bear in London, in the underground, on buses, in department stores, and the scrapes he got into and the way that everything always turned out well. But then I think when I revisited him as an adult with my own children, I really saw what an extraordinary character Michael Bond had come up with, and this beautiful simplicity of this character with these very deep sort of philosophical roots, that he just has this quintessential innocence, wonder, politeness, always sees the best in others. He's never sentimental because he has that hard stare for people who've forgotten their manners, so that there's a little edge to him. But he is the essence of wonder, innocence, goodness. He's like everybody's inner child and the bit of you that you really want to preserve. And he's, a great force for good. And I was working at Heyday Films, where we make family films, and we were looking for projects. And I just felt that there was something about Paddington's character that could grow, really. And obviously, in that first book, it's an extraordinary story. He comes from Peru. He's the quintessential immigrant refugee. He arrives at a place, meets a family, and finds a new home. Now, actually, in the books, it's quite, in the first beautiful book, it's quite simple. He arrives, he meets the Browns, and he quickly falls into a lovely ritualized life at Windsor Gardens. But what we did in the first film is we opened it up at that moment when he arrives, he meets the Browns, and then there's a little gap that we introduced of, well, would he really feel at home immediately? And so the whole first film was just that adventure of how he finds his home and knows his home is with the Browns. But
did you have to convince them, Heyday, that this is a good idea?
Not really. I mean, I think I talked to David Heyman, who runs Heyday, and he had a Paddington as a boy, and so he was up for the idea. It had become a slightly dusty, receding character at that time. The people who owned the rights was a Canadian animation company who I think had gone under, so it was a bit stuck, and we had to wait a long time to get the rights. And we made firm friends with Michael Bond and really, listened and talked to him a lot about what made Paddington work. And one of the great tips he gave us, actually, because he'd written the original scripts for the first animated series, was how important it was to retain Paddington's voice, his inner voice, his way of thinking. And in the original scripts, Michael Hordern had done this narration, so you heard that. But what we did in both the films, and has also been a real mainstay of the new preschool series we're doing, is we have Paddington writing to Aunt Lucy. So you don't just have him interacting with characters, but you get that sense of the inner workings of his fresh eyes on everything all the time through his letters to Aunt Lucy. I mean, why don't we show, we're going to show a couple of clips. First of all, the wonderful Ivor Wood original filmfare, Paddington, written by Michael Bond and narrated by Michael Hordern. We'll begin with that. And then we've got a little clip of our new updated Blue Zoo series to show.
Mr. and Mrs. Brown first met Paddington on a railway station, which was how he came to have such an unusual name for a bear. They were waiting for their daughter Judy when Mr. Brown caught sight of him sitting on an old suitcase behind a pile of mail bags. As they drew near, he stood up and politely raised his hat. "Good afternoon," he said. "Can I help you?" "Well, no," said Mr. Brown. "We were wondering if we could help you." "You're a very small bear," said Mrs. Brown. "Where are you from?" "Darkest Peru," said the bear. "I'm not really supposed to be here at all. I'm a stowaway. I came all the way in a lifeboat, and I ate marmalade. Bears like marmalade. I used to live with my Aunt Lucy, but she had to go into a home for retired bears, so I emigrated." "Oh." "Aunt Lucy always said she wanted me to emigrate when I was old enough, but now that I have, I'm not quite sure what to do next." As he bent down, the Browns caught sight of a label round his neck. It said, "Please look after this bear, thank you." It was the kind of label you couldn't possibly ignore, and in no time at all, things began to happen. Mrs. Brown thought of a name for him. Paddington. And while she went off to look for Judy, Mr. Brown was put in charge of ordering some refreshments. Paddington. Paddington. "Come along, Paddington," said Mr. Brown. "I expect you're hungry after your long journey." "I am," said Paddington. "Very."
That is. So how much of a template was
yes.
was this compared to your new?
I think one of the key things to say is that label has been really central to us. Please look after this pair. Thank you. We've taken it really seriously, the group of us who've been working on Paddington in his sort of reinvented form over the past few years. We feel incredibly protective of his innocence. And he is actually a character who's had various different incarnations, from Peggy Fortnam's drawings to this Ivor Wood incarnation, to our more photoreal bear in the films. But we do feel that there is a very strong DNA with his character that underpins all of it. And as I say, we're very protective about that. All of us loved certain things about this original series. And there's something about the very simple backdrops, and then the intimacy that you get with Paddington by him being more 3D amidst all the other characters. And I think our new series is very much an homage to this original version. It's CGI, so it's not stop frame like this, but it's CGI that mimics a stop frame feel and texture. And it does have these sort of slightly simplified backgrounds in which the character, and you know, obviously with the advancements of CGI, you have more fluidity and more scope to move them around and have a bit more flexibility about what action there can be. But there's very much drawn from these different layers, which also, I don't know if any of you saw the film Paddington 2, where Paddington goes inside the pop-up book, which also felt very much drawn from this original aesthetic that had been created in the film fair world. And as I say, although it's a straight narration in that, and we've moved away from that, we have scripts, but we've retained that sense of there being a voice through Paddington having his letters to Aunt
And
Lucy.
you've kept the voice from the film.
Yes, indeed. One of the things that was very interesting, actually, was that because we were all so familiar with Michael Hordern and his deep voice as telling the stories of Paddington, when we came to casting Paddington's voice in the film originally, we talked to Colin Firth, because he seemed to embody that wonderful, deep, rich, chocolatey voice. And then actually when it came to it and we had the bear playing, it just didn't quite sit right. And there was something a little bit too adult and mature about Colin's voice. And so we didn't really have any idea whose voice was right. And so we asked all sorts of actors who came along and sat in a booth with images of our bear playing on the screen. And the person who really emerged as just having that soul of innocence, that purity, and that wonderful, fresh-eyed wonder was of course, Ben Whishaw. And we're absolutely thrilled that he has continued in the preschool series. And indeed, 3 of my colleagues in the TV series are here. Karen, the producer, Michelle, who's the casting director, and Sharon Miller, who's been busily directing Ben. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your work with him and what you feel he brings to Paddington's special character.
I'm going to stand up.
Sharon Miller.
Hello. Working with Ben is wonderful, because I think the voice of Paddington has to come from inside, has to come from a real understanding of Paddington's character. You can't plonk it on. And what Ben has is an innate understanding of the Paddington that we saw originally. And watching Ben work, he has a sense of wonder, and he's very wide-eyed when he records Paddington, and he's quite intense. And you see almost morphing this bear, in a manner of speaking. And he has the wonderful delight and also a lot of questions in his voice, and an acceptance and a great respect. And it is, when I give notes to Ben, it's not about go faster, go slower. It's all about what Paddington is thinking. What's he thinking now? And it's being so true to the original thoughts that were written by Michael Bond. And that makes it quite remarkable, because it's almost a stewardship of Paddington, and taking him onwards. And that's really the work that we do. And Ben has an awful lot of lines. And he works with incredible intensity. And that's quite remarkable and fabulous, because he takes it like everybody else who works on it, both with great seriousness, but also with great love.
And that's something about working on Paddington, actually. It's been such a joy and a privilege, the journey we've been on with him, because he's just such a good character. And everybody, says, what would Paddington to do here? And, no, that's not Paddingtonian. And there's a whole sort of way of thinking and being that we all understand what it is, and we're all quite connected by it, and we're all quite protective of it.
Do you feel like, because this particular new series, it's a preschool series, did you have to do any changes so that it wasn't as it wasn't as diverse in its audience? Because the films are for the whole family, really, aren't they?
Yes, we have definitely brought the series into a younger age group. We've actually we didn't Hugh Bonneville and Sally Hawkins, who play the parents brilliantly in the film, they're not voicing the parents in this, because we've taken the parents into a slightly younger part of their lives, and the two children slightly younger. So yes, we have. I mean, it's more in the world of the books in a way, because it's all the little domestic episodes that Paddington enjoys in this safe haven of Windsor Gardens community.
So why do you think Paddington has survived 50, how many years? Something like 58 years or something like that.
Well, as I say, I think it's the singularity of this character and his fresh eyes on the world and his force for good, that he's just, we came up with a mantra in the second film, which his philosophy is, be kind and polite and all will be right. And there's a sort of and everybody poo-poos it, and then it turns out to make a difference. And there is a kind of an innocence about Paddington. But as I say, it's never just saccharine, because there's all the slapstick and there's the curiosity that goes with it, and there is always the hard stare to hold you in place.
That's a good philosophy for everyone. If in doubt, give them a hard stare.
Should we show you a clip of a little taste of a moment of the new animated series?
Yes, please.
Cake. Pancake. Jonathan said they were flat. Perfect. Now to serve.
I think one of the things that these two productions had in common was that they originated from a single person or a single family's vision, the Postgate family and the Bond family. Now, fast forward many years, not many productions are conceived and created with just that simple origin. Do you find there are many challenges because of all the external factors, I'll ask all three of you, that are now involved in making a new production? Do you feel they interfere with the creative process?
Well, I think that there's so much more at stake now, really. I mean, I think that it's a global concern. Making a program like these is very expensive. Right. I mean, the way Peter and Oliver worked was relatively cheap, and they were left to do what they were doing, and that was okay. But I think now there's a lot more involved, isn't there? These things need to be sold. The programs, ideally, need to travel around the world and sell well.
Something you're.
No, it was more just a British-based thing, in those days, I think, and I'm not involved in the business side of things, but that seems to be the sort of an issue, really. So things have to be looked at and scrutinised and gone through, and it's not so easy to just have one person sort of coming up with the whole thing completely.
For example, do these alien or characters, are they unwelcome in certain regions around the world, do you know? Oh, they...
The Clangers?
yes. Are they accepted everywhere, the
I don't
Clangers?
know. I would have thought so.
I think somebody said, well, I mean, I read in the Daily Mail, somebody said that they thought they were unchristian.
Oh, okay.
Because they lived in another place. I think they are very Christian, actually. I came from sort of a Quaker family, and I thought that their values are very Quakery,
That'll be the new
Christian,
headline.
you know, yeah.
Now,
So,
hangers
yeah,
are Christian.
Yeah.
But I think there was the difference in the days when the Clangers were made, when the original Paddington was made. It was usually not only the work of one... It was usually the work of one animator as well. I mean, I remember going to see Ivor Wood when he was making the first series of Postman Pat, and it was him. Just in a room with a table, that's it. You know, and he just worked until he'd done it. And I think if you look at, you know, King Rollo, most of them actually, most of the early, you know, Mr. Ben,
Yes.
most of them are one animator, two animators possibly. Very simple.
Yes.
You know, Morph.
Of-
You know, Morph was
Dragging up on my childhood.
was Pete and David. You know, it was them
Yes.
with very little interference.
No, exactly. How about Rosie? How do you feel
Well,
about
I
this?
mean, any film or animated series, as far as I can see, it takes a village of mad idealists to make it work, and that's certainly true of Paddington. There's been a huge number of people working on both the films and now the series we're doing. I don't know. It does seem to me still that it's possible to keep a unity and a singleness of vision when there is a very strong piece of work with its own quite strong DNA to it. Studio Canal own the rights to Paddington, and they're very protective as well. And they know how much we love him at Heyday, so they've been very keen to engage us there as sort of backstop on everything as well. So,
Did you find you have to put on a different hat making the TV series as opposed to this huge monster of a movie?
No, it's a complete new learning curve. We knew nothing about TV, so it was a long chain of meeting people who introduced us to other people, who brought us to the wonderful Karen producing it, Michelle, Sharon, building up a lovely team of like-minded kindred spirits.
Great. I think we've got a few minutes left. Would anyone like to ask any questions? Ooh, very quiet out there. Nothing at all? Okay. Right, okay. Well,
there's one.
oh, there is one. Hello. Over there, can you see? You're shy.
Hi, no.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Johnny Ford from Finger Industries, based here in Sheffield. I mean, you're talking about kind of singularity of vision. Do you think, I guess this is, Rosie, you may have half answered this, you do feel that it's still possible to kind of promote something that is that has kind of such a strong, singular, sort of left of field vision in this kind of current field that we all work in now?
I very much hope so. You'll have to see, I mean, in truth, the essence of the films was very much, the singularity there was very much made possible by our brilliant writer-director on those, Paul King. And the TV series, I mean, there's 52 episodes, so it is a bit more spread wide in terms of how it's being, but it's done by this wonderful company, Blue Zoo, and with an amazing team led by Adam. And I think it's got... Karen, why don't you speak about this as the producer?
Yeah, I think it's teamwork, but everyone working with the same goal. You know, we're all following the creative lead of, the aim to produce the best Paddington possible.
Thank you very much. Anyone else have any questions out there? Oh, another.
Hello. Yes.
Oh, can we? Yeah.
I'd just like to, first of all, thank Dan and Dan. What a gorgeous session. And for looking after such a cherished character. But also, Paddington looks back, but it also is very now. Michael Bond created Paddington in the aftermath of his experience in the Second World War, where the world was awash with migrants and the dispossessed. And I think Paddington's more relevant today, actually, than it has been for a while. And I just really, with all my heart, want to congratulate you on the second film, because we live in a franchise world diminishing returns, where every successive film gets worse and a little bit less delightful than the last. And I thought your second film was a triumph. I went to see it 3 times.
Well, as I say, most of the credit, apart from Michael Bond on that, is due to Paul King.
Yes.
But as I say, it does take a village of mad idealists to make such a film. And we were thrilled with how that came together. And it was a joy to see how it reached people. And as you say, how pertinent it felt. But we were it is the gift of this character. There was the potential within Paddington to create that film and that
story. It's a
story.
great humanist accomplishment, I think, really, yes.
Yeah.
And I took my whole team, and we were saying, how much did they spend on that sequence in the credits? It must have been £250,000. Good on you. Thank you very much.
Any more questions out there? Oh, we have right at the front. Oh, where you go?
There's one over there.
Okay.
This is for Daniel Postgate. Could you have ended up doing anything else growing up in your household?
Well, yeah, it was funny actually, because I was thinking, I've often sort of asked about, because I was about 6 or 7 when the Clangers was being made, and they were made in this old medieval, it was an ancient barn. And it was funny because there was swallows nesting in there, and they used to poo on the planet, and my dad had to mop the planet in the morning. And they had little baby birds would fall out of the nests into the planet as well. And Peter made hammocks to catch them, but they missed their hammocks. And
Springwatch would have a field day with that one.
And then there was the mice. But the thing is, after they finished filming, he gave me the puppets, and I'd take them out in the yard and play with them. I had a Sky Moo I played with, and it fell apart, which was a bit of a shame, really, a bit of a crime, really. We didn't know, but they didn't think they were going to be, once the program's made, they didn't think they'd go on to be particularly become, 50 years later, they were still sort of cherished. But anyway, I used to think about making my own programs, or invent my own little characters and things like that. I mean, I originally went into children's books, really. That's what I did for about 15 or 16 years before taking over from my dad's, inheriting small films. But yeah, I suppose, it was always something about, I don't know about animation as such. I never sort of got because I saw him at it, after primary school. I used to pop in and see him on the way home. And, it's sort of quite a slow process. I used to think, I don't know about this bit of it. I quite like the idea of writing stories, inventing characters, but the process of animation was quite sort of, obviously today it's different because there's lots of people and they're all together and they have fun and stuff like that. But my dad was in his pig shed sometimes all day long. And he had a converted pig shed he worked in as well as the barn. There was this, he had the roof raised, and it was a sort of for long pigs, they called it. Just the magic of sort of writing stories and working characters was very appealing. So yeah, it didn't become a plumber or anything.
Thank goodness for that. Now you're still making new Clangers now, aren't you?
Yes, we are. Yes.
Now, the new Paddington, it's going to preview in next year, but in the US before that, is that correct?
Karen? Early next year.
Next year.
Yes.
Early next year.
Yeah.
And could we possibly have another little listen at your whistle?
What would you like to say?
I don't know, what would you like to say?
That's all, folks.
Thank you very much. Dan Postgate, Dan Madicott, Rosie Allison. Thank you very much.